Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome WSWA President and CEO, Craig Wolf.
I can't stop the feeling. Nothing I can see but you when you dance, dance, dance.
How we doing? How we doing? Good? Getting towards the end here. We got some great stuff this afternoon. So welcome officially to the U.S. Beverage Alcohol Forum. We have a great lineup, thank you, of sessions and speakers for you this afternoon. Information on the sessions and complete bios can be found in your recently handed to me USBAF booklet and on the WSWA mobile app. If you haven't yet downloaded the app, you can find it at the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, and the password is WSWA74. You're going to need the app to vote in our second session, the brand battle. So please connect to the wireless connection in the ballroom to use wireless services. Go to the Ritz-Carlton Conference Wireless Network and use passcode WSWA 2017. And there are, in fact, connection instructions on your table if it wasn't simple enough from my description, okay? So let's get started. Our moderator for our first session, Trends from Buzzy Bars to Big Data, is a leading spirits and drinks expert behind 4 of the country's most respected craft cocktail bars, including the James Beard Award-nominated Columbia Room and Mockingbird Hill. He is a native Washingtonian, has concocted cocktails at the White House, and was appointed Chief Spirits Advisor for the National Archives. Playboy recently ranked him on its top 10 list of top 10 entertainers who thought, on the list of 10 entertainers who thought leaders and heroes who will save us in 2017. That's quite a ranking. Please join me in a warm welcome for Drink Company President Derek Brown.
I do like to point out that was number 5, and number 6 was Lady Gaga on the People Who Save Us. I told that to my mother, who essentially asked, who is Lady Gaga? I told her it's important. It's important, Mom. So I would like to introduce Danny Brager, who is going to tell us a little bit about the big data, which sounds a little intimidating, but is in a very important category. He is the Senior Vice President of the Nielsen Beverage alcohol practice. And he basically measures the mind of the consumer. So I think that's a very important thing. Then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about Buzzy trends. So with no further ado, let me introduce Danny Brager.
Well, I've got about 15 or 20 minutes to talk to you about product and related retail and consumer trends. And that's really important because if the consumer's not buying our products, then we're not here. We deal with a lot of facts at Nielsen. We measure actually what consumers watch on TV, like the Nielsen ratings. We measure what they watch on through digital content and what they're exposed to, and we measure what they're buying. And sometimes that data might be used to kind of stretch a really good selling story. And maybe sometimes when that stretches into those selling stories, it heads into the territory of alternative facts. For alternative facts, I want to thank the thousands of you that are here today, actually. I appreciate everyone spending the afternoon with us. So when we talk about facts, we collect a lot of them. So Derek mentioned we measure the mind of the consumer. We actually measure not just the mind, but what they act upon. And our facts come from a lot of data. And it keeps getting bigger and bigger. So we've got about 120,000 UPCs on our database, what consumers are buying. For the on-premise, we get a bunch of data from all sorts of different outlets. We get about over 3 million unique product lines that we've got to match the patterns to brands. We get scanning data from around 160,000 stores, so what consumers are actually buying and putting through cash registers. We get data from 1 million households. And we have another 1 million or so households as part of an e-receipt panel so we can measure their e-commerce purchases or online purchases. So I'm first going to look at the big beverage alcohol picture because the fact of the matter is that the majority of consumers really switch across categories, whether it's purchasing at a store or drinking at their home or when they're out. Even on a single evening out, many drink beer, wine, and spirits during that night. Up to about half of those that are 21 to 34 have at least 2 of those categories, beer, wines, and spirits, and about 17% drink all 3 during the course of an evening out. So when we talk about kind of the battle for consumer spending, and consumers are spending about $234 billion on beer, wines, and spirits during the course of a year, I really want to emphasize a couple of things. One is that everything is really about a share battle at a high level, because the fact of the matter is that over the long term, per capita consumption of alcohol is pretty flat. It doesn't really change, and it really hasn't changed over the years. And the second thing is that within that kind of battle of the poor, if that's what I can call it, we're winning. The wines and spirits category is winning. So if you look at a share of servings between 2003 and 2016, you can see the beer numbers have gone down and the wines and spirits numbers have come up. So probably, if you're a beer person here, it's kind of sad. If you're a wines and spirits person, it's probably good news and you're not too sad. And even, as the beer category is struggling a bit, even the craft rocket, which is fueling or has fueled a lot of the growth in the category, has really slowed quite dramatically over the last year or so. And yet there's well over 5,000 breweries that are opening at a rate of 2 per day. So even during the course of the last week, if you've been here for the week, there's another 10 breweries that are out there fighting for that, some volume that's increasingly getting harder to get. And all that's creating a little bit more tension within the beer industry between big brewers and small independent craft guys who sell out to big brewers and distributors and people who open up tap rooms and so on and so forth. And we've helped probably to create some of that tension because wines and spirits is gaining while beer has been losing share. If we look at craft beer trends on this slide, the black bar represents craft beer share of the category, and the red bar represents craft beer growth. And you can see how dynamic it was, but how it's started to slow down to the point where over the last 13 weeks ago, it's still growing, but pretty minimally. And there's been lots of reaction to that slowing trend. So that's one thing. It's per capita consumption's flat, so it's a kind of a battle for share at the high level. The second thing, and this is just, I guess, my opinion, is that I think that sometimes as an industry, we forget that there's more out there than just millennials to consider. And maybe I take that even more to heart since I guess my millennial days have passed a long time ago. But the fact of the matter is that at the other end of the age spectrum, and I just showed 55 plus here, that group still accounts for the largest share of wine volume. And it accounts for an equal share of spirits volume as millennials do. And there's some categories or segments where it's even more. And some of us are living in that age group, are living a lot longer, and they still want to enjoy a beverage of their choice well into their retirement age. So, we shouldn't be focused, depending on the product, but as an industry on just one segment. And then the second thing I would say about that is that millennials, we talk about them like they're one big homogeneous group. So here you're looking at the number of millennials year by year. So if we define millennials between 21 and 39, there's somewhere between 4 million and 4.7 million at each age group. But if you just think about the difference between a 21-year-old that's maybe still in college or maybe just starting their full-time career versus someone in their 30s who's got a family and who's working full-time or has an established career, it's like talking about night and day. Or consider the fact that over 40% of millennials are actually multicultural. So we sometimes talk about millennials and then we talk about multicultural like they're two different people. And a lot of them are one and the same person. Or I'll give you one other stat. About 28% of millennials make less than $25,000 a year, whereas about 15% make more than $100,000 a year. Do you think that they may be buying and drinking different things? I think so. $25,000 versus $100,000. So I think it makes a difference. And if I show you this chart and just explain it to you, that's kind of exactly what this says. It says, if you look at that first column there, that millennials with no children say they consume spirits in the past 7 days 24% more than the average millennial, whereas those without children, which is that purple area, said they consume spirits during a similar day period 19% less than the average millennial. And you'll find differences all over the place. By gender, male millennials are really high for spirits, female millennials are really high for wine, and there's similar extremes by income group or by multicultural group. And those differences just get bigger and bigger if we drill down into further granularity within the category. So the consumers we're competing for, they're changing, they're becoming more diverse and more fragmented. And as that happens, their attitudes are different generation to generation, their needs and preferences are different, and their behaviors are different. So it's created that consumer fragmentation whether you talk about income fragmentation, generation fragmentation, multicultural fragmentation, technology is fragmenting things, legal changes in our industry is fragmenting things. That creates product fragmentation, and it creates retailer fragmentation as well. So just as an example of the product fragmentation, it's kind of created this, what I would say is a longer tail economy for most categories, including ourselves. There's a lot more product choices available to satisfy an increasingly fragmented consumer base, especially younger generations who really desire that diversity of choice, and they have infinite access to information online, and they're very comfortable shopping for products much differently than past generations. So here what we're looking at is the percentage of category volume contributed by the top 25 brands in each of beer, wines, and spirits in 2010, and then 5 years later what those same 25 brands accounted for. And then the last column is today's top 25 in each category, and it's smaller than it was 5 years ago. And then if I look at the number of the top 25 brands from 5 years ago that are actually selling less volume today than 5 years ago, you can see it's a really large percentage of the 25 brands. And keep in mind that each share point is worth about 4 million cases in wine and about 2.2 million cases of spirits. That's a lot of volume being transferred to that longer tail. That fragmentation is also happening at retail. So on the one hand, we've got limited assortment stores, which are growing fast. On the other hand, if you look at the farthest right-hand side, sort of the upscale, fresh, gourmet type stores are also growing really quickly. And then we've got a number of retail formats that are catering to a multicultural community, whether it be Asian or Hispanics, and they're also growing really quickly. So suppliers and distributors really need to adapt to all those changes. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what people are buying within the wines and spirits category. We gather data from the off-premise, a lot of different channels. We gather data now, starting last year, from the on-premise. So we're able to kind of get a bird's eye view, at least, at what consumers are, not just what's in their mind, but what they're doing when they take that product and take it through the cash register or order it at a bar. So here's what it looked like for 2016. The way we would look at that, the off-premise side is the left-hand side, and the on-premise side is the right-hand side. And for each of beer, wines, and spirits, we're showing the volume growth and then the dollar growth. So just a couple of quick observations. One is that on-premise is not growing as fast as off-premise. And that's really been the case for the last few years right now. The second thing is that beer is trailing wines and spirits, which I touched on before. And so its share of adult beverages has declined rather relentlessly through the past few years. And then the third is you see that trade up. So dollars are growing faster than volume. And that's really because consumers are trading up, whether it's for higher end beer, higher end wine, or higher end spirits. Sometimes it gets a little blurry too. So on-premise, like I said, it's under a little bit of pressure. There's lots of reasons why that's the case. But now you can go into some grocery stores and kind of they don't look like a grocery store sometimes. Because grocery stores, they're trying to capture consumer to make coming into their store more than just a boring shopping trip and have them spend their money in their store for not just the products they buy from the shelf, but what they might eat or what they might drink in their stores. And that's sort of the genesis of what some people call sort of grocerants, which is the combination of a grocery and a restaurant. I also mentioned premiumization or trading up. So lots of different reasons why people do that. We ask consumers, why do you do that? So, why do you trade up to a more expensive or a premium brand of alcohol? And we just are just showing you here their response to why they say they trade up. It really starts with better taste and better quality from what they say. But consumers also, more so than others who are buying premium products, equate premium with innovation and equate it with something new and something different and trying new things, especially millennials. That's the blue bar is millennials, and they even more so than the overall adult population talk about, I like to try new things, and they equate trying new things with more premium products. Okay, I'm going to quickly just profile some wine trends and just talk about some of the segments that are growing well. So we'll talk about, for instance, countries of origin. And I put down the percentage growth rates that we're seeing over the last 52 weeks versus a year ago. Mainly double digits or close to double digits. California, which is the top left, isn't double digits, but it's such a huge origin, obviously, for wine, that represent tons of volume. In fact, the year-on-year growth for California wines is 4 times larger than the year-on-year growth for Italy, even though Italy is growing at faster rates. By varietal, we see things, and sometimes that equates to the country of origin. So rosé is on fire, up 48%. France is also on fire. That's one of the reasons is 62% of rosé is from France, at least right now. You can see Prosecco, which ties into Italy, Sauvignon Blanc up 12%. A lot of that ties in New Zealand, which is also up 15%. Strong growth from Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, and then red blends keep chugging along, still at double-digit growth rates. Beyond that, so there's also all the alternative packaging, and I certainly saw lots of that at this conference, up 10%. So anything other than a bottle, 3-liter boxes, Tetra, cans, et cetera, et cetera. And then consumers are trading up in the wine category. So if we want to look at that trade up, just look at the price points on the bottom and look at the growth rates on top. And you can see that starting at around $10, that's where we're seeing growth rates of 11, 12, et cetera, %, and anything below that, not so much. Alternative packaging, I think the wine category in particular does a great job of just finding different ways of getting wine from the supplier into the mouth of the consumer. So lots of different single-serve options. There's a premium box Tetra, a whole lot of cans coming into the marketplace, and we'll see, how they do. It's a little bit early to kind of judge in the long term how it might do, and then wine on tap in bars. And when we ask consumers, especially in the on-premise, what are the things they kind of like or are open to? Are they aware of it? Have they tried it? Would you try it if it was available? Wine cocktails, cocktails at brunch, and wine on tap seem to pop up. The other thing about wine that is as a tailwind that's really benefiting the category is just there's a lot more places that are selling wine. So we also measure just the number of actual locations, and this is in hundreds of thousands. So it says that there's 190,000 off-premise locations in the country selling wine versus 173,000 in 2012. Same in the on-premise, just more and more locations that are selling wine, so Americans have more access to wine. And that's been chugging along at about a 2% annual growth rate. And some of the fastest growing types of locations that I'm showing here really shows the diversity in making wine more accessible to the American wine consumer. Sports bars, theaters, and then on the off-premise side, both the limited assortment stores as well as the natural side, sort of both ends of things. Okay, I'm going to touch quickly on spirits in the same way, and I don't think for those of you kind of in the business, some of these aren't going to be surprises, but just kind of validating what you're hearing if you are not looking at the overall industry numbers. Whiskey is growing, bourbon 9%. A lot of still energy and incremental volume coming from whiskey flavors. It's up 12%. Apple's up 15%, for instance, so still a lot of incremental growth from whiskey flavors, not so much from vodka flavors. Cognac up 17%, tequila up 9%. Bottle sizes are kind of interesting. Those little mini bottles are just flying out of stores, as well as pints. Both of them are up double-digit growth rates. A lot of craft spirits coming into the marketplace, obviously, still pretty small, only about 2% of volume, maybe 3 or 4% of dollars. So on a small base, growing pretty rapidly. And then just like wine, we're seeing that trade-up story. So if we look at the economy segment within spirits, then the mid-price segment, then the premium segment, and the ultra-premium segment, you can see both the premium and ultra-premium are growing far in excess of kind of that mid or lower end, even though ultra-premium softened up a little bit in the last couple of months. That's off-premise. If we look at sort of the on-premise side, kind of the highlights are that spirits is doing significantly better than beer for sure, and a little bit ahead of wine in the on-premise. Spirits is actually, this year, will be bigger than beer on a dollar basis in the on-premise. Vodka and whiskey sort of fight it out for share supremacy in the on-premise in total. And then when I look a little bit deeper, tequila and cordials are much more significantly developed in the on-premise than off-premise. So that's in terms of their level of development. From a growth standpoint, the blue is off-premise and the red is on-premise. So just a couple things to point out. Generally, there's better growth in the off-premise side of things, but tequila and cognac in particular are doing really well in the on-premise side of things. Whiskey, not as much. You can see that on-premise is about half the growth of off-premise. And one of the things that doesn't seem to be happening as much in the on-premise side is flavors aren't generating the kind of growth that they are in more the retail store environment, as in bars. When we ask consumers again about some of the things they are aware of, they've tried, would try, some of the typical things, I guess. We see brunch cocktails again, craft spirits, not a surprise, not low alcoholic cocktails. Premixed cocktails on draft came up, and then Japanese whiskey, and of course everyone knows about mezcal, no surprise there. And then finally, as suppliers recognize that consumers, they actually like drinking different things across all beverage adult categories because they drink all three categories often, a lot of companies are kind of mixing it up and aging different products together. So we see a lot more kind of mixing of beer and wine, or wine and beer, or vodka in a bourbon barrel. I mean, a lot of that kind of stuff going on, which is probably kind of fun for the winemaker or the brewmaster or the distiller trying to come up with sort of interesting different kinds of things. So I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about kind of what's next in the industry. And it's tough to figure out what's next in this industry. My guess is probably as good as any of yours. And from that perspective, I kind of fully subscribe to what Yogi Berra says about predicting the future, that it's tough when you're predicting the future. He made such brilliant comments, but especially these days. So I was thinking, like, if you go back 10 years ago, actually the iPhone didn't even exist. It actually was launched in July 2017. Now, most of us kind of use some smartphone as our way of kind of living day to day, but that wasn't even available back then. Now we've got voice control systems that let us, speak our wishes and have it fulfilled in a smart controlled home, and I'm sure that will evolve into more and more parts of our daily life. And what's down the road? We all know about self-driving cars. That's going to be here, soon, because they're certainly out there or testing already. And from an alcohol perspective, I mean, we've seen actually drones, because this is a real shot, not something I made up, deliver beer to fishermen on an ice lake in Lake Michigan. That wasn't until the FAA found out about it and actually took away the license, I guess, apparently. Just when I was kind of Googling, there's a hotel in Northern California that delivers wine to their guests. I assume it must be an outdoor suite as opposed to the drone getting in the elevator and pushing the button, but they're delivering wine to their guests. So the landscape is changing, and it's changing really, really quickly. So if you think we've had a lot of fragmentation or disruption so far, it's just going to continue to accelerate for all the reasons that are on here. And the reasons are multiple. Meal kits and alcohol delivery apps and pure play retailers and brick and mortar retailers who have to be able to deliver things to compete, and direct to consumer in the wine category, and wine pure play retailers and brew pubs, and all those kinds of things are all here and will only continue to be the case. And then we've got marijuana coming, and people sort of conjecturing what that might do. So the truth is we live in a bricks plus clicks world, and that's not going to change. And today's consumers are, they shop in multiple channels. The only thing I would say is that if you look at alcohol today, so this is the chart that says, what have you shopped for these categories online? And you can see if you go down to the very bottom, it's alcohol. And that's 8% of consumers say they've shopped for alcohol online, which is quite a bit behind some other categories. But I suspect that will continue to grow as more consumers are accustomed to it and there's more ability for them to do it. So with that, and I will just to give you some perspective of why I think that it will continue to grow. One of the reasons is in other countries. So the US is in there at about 8%. There's 60 other countries on that page. Countries like China, Japan, Great Britain, more than 20% of their consumers in those countries buy alcohol online. So it's not like it's not happening in the world, it is. So with that, I think I'm going to try to get to the very back and just show you this one slide just about marijuana. There's so much conjecture out there about what's going to happen. We did a consumer survey only about a month ago. We asked consumers if marijuana was legalized in your state, what would you do in terms of your alcohol consumption? The vast majority said no change. That's the black bar. On balance, the rest said they might cut back a little bit. Beer even a little bit more, which kind of makes sense. But in the data that we've seen so far, because we're measuring sales of alcohol in states like Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, we haven't seen any impact. So what might happen and what you hear about might happen, to some degree, I think is a bit of conjecture until we see what really will happen. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I thank you for your time, and I will turn it over back to Derek, I think. Thank you.